Hey, what's up, guys? Man, I got this. I read through this book at the comic store I was at. And then I read the rest of it. I bought it, and it's funny. This is a great book, but yours truly could have wrote this book because pretty much of the war comics I've been following over since 2018, since I started this channel. Everything that was mentioned, most of the things that were mentioned as favorites and goods, yours truly has gone over and has also concurred with. Now, of course, our artists at war. It's very normie World War II book, if you know what I mean by that. But it's recommended, man. Get TwoMorrows Publishing. They also publish like the magazines I like that come out every month. I don't get everyone, but like Alter Ego, Comic Book Creator, they really are curating what is pretty much the glory days of the comic medium in the American sense. 80 years, right? 80 years since comics started. 80 years since what? The war. Always the war. Of course, there's more than just World War II in here, but I like how they have a nice intro here. Willie Franz, I've mentioned some of the best war comics I've ever written in America was by this guy here, who was a teenager when he wrote it. And he even starts out with a letter he wrote to Joe Gill, the main writer at Charlton, who was very conservative, and they would have political disagreements, but they could still be friends. Right? I like what he wrote here. You know, in terms of Vietnam, obviously, I felt that my or any other generation of Americans should not be turned into a 20th century Hessian to fight and be maimed and killed for Goodyear rubber in a succession of corrupt foreign regimes engaged in some filthy civil war thousands of miles from my home. Yeah, it's always that, isn't it? Yeah. Of course, now looking through here, where do you have war? Where do war comics start? Well, actually, interestingly enough, they start before the war. Okay? Oh, that's right. You take that, Adolf. Yeah. Now it's funny. Jack Kirby, right? They were anti-fascist. Right. By the time the United States went into the war, nearly every comic book publisher had aligned themselves against an enemy. The country was not yet officially battling. Well, because most people didn't want to be in the war. But Jack Kirby, and you can see this on Wikipedia, he didn't agree. He even said Captain America was his, and whoever the other creator was, their way to respond to America first. Okay, most Americans did not want to get into the war, right? But Jack Kirby wanted you to get into the war. To give him credit, at least he was a soldier in the war, so he put his money where his mouth was. But you get here, of course, Black Hawk. Oh, you're Japanese. Air Boy. Look, the kid. What is this? The Boy Commandos. I thought it was wrong to send kids to war. Oh, anyway, it's going through here. Of course, Harvey Kurtzman, EC War Comics. Now, I hate to say this. I think EC is a little overrated, you know. And there he is. But I've gone over Two-Fisted Tales. You had a lot of good stories in this, okay? Now, war wasn't so glorious because you're not fighting the people that you don't like, apparently. But war comics proper really started during the Korean War, right? And look, you got a young John Severin. Look at that. So, and yeah, Two-Fisted Tales, you had, like I said, most of the stories deal with this, but they branched out, right, doing Civil War stuff. Right, Kurtzman was troubled by the enormous, this here with Wally Wood, the Rommel, right? He was troubled by the enormous amount of respect being afforded to Rommel in the post-war years, especially his growing reputation as a humane and professional officer, right, who rose above the German hierarchy and high command's bloodier racial concerns. Right, but he didn't excuse him being a leader in an army led and supported by some of the most vilest human beings to have ever existed. A lot of vile people in that war. I will say that is true. I don't like Rommel either, but I've gone over it for the reasons are totally different from Kurtzman. But we're looking at the comics here, right? That frontline combat, yeah, John, and you get yeah. DC, I think, was the first one to make recurring war characters. Sergeant Rock, right? I never saw her, but they mentioned like Johnny Cloud, right? The Indian P-51 pilot. The War That Time Forgot. You had dinosaurs, right? Gunner and Sarge, and Pooch, remember them? Yeah. Easy Company. Of course, my favorite was the Haunted Tank, but you know, once again, remember the video I did way back? Right. The writers of this, they kind of focus on what they think were the best war comics. Of course, the great Robert Kanigher, and I mean, this dude was crazy. This dude made some crazy stories. The Enemy Ace, right? Joe Kubert. I told you how great Enemy Ace was, right? Only DC dares to reveal the enemy side of the war, man. Obviously, I've gone over that, but yeah, I agree with that. And yes, Garth Ennis. I know I rip on Garth Ennis, but he's done so much war stuff. Some of the stuff is good. This was great. Right? Also, I don't want to. Once again, John Severin keeps popping up. Him, Ross Heath, and Sam Glansman were probably three of the best artists you had, American artists that you had. Period. I remember the end of this, right? Even Garth did this, right? Where, he wants to surrender because of the evil of the Nazis. But his friend's like, hey, man, we're fighting for our people. Who are going to die from the American and British bombers. I remember the end of this when he flies head-on into the B-17 and looks at the crew before he fucking lights them up. I always thought that was a cool ending. And also, underrated Dell. Dell was actually making war comics with Glansman, right? That were actually kind of just educational comics. They were dramatic narratives, but they were kind of gritty, and they kind of just showed what happened in the battles. Sergeant Fury. What did they do to you, Nick Fury? This I can't speak of. I've never heard of this story, but obviously you see the great art in it. Once again, John Severin. And the stories were very brutal. What year is this coming out, okay? That's right, Vietnam. Vietnam changed a lot of this stuff. And what is this? Oh, bad blue coats. Oh, Atunche, you're going to watch. You probably like what they do. They deserve what they get. Because they're evil, right? Very Christian. Let me show you. Now you see the American war comic grows up. Why? Because of Vietnam. Remember, Make War No More. Now you start to see stuff like this. Right? How many guys in Easy Company, you didn't have nicknames. Those guys were done. And I had no idea Severin did something with Sergeant Fury, this Howling Commandos. What a great artist, man. They made some, look at Dum Dum Dugan, remember him? But they had some serious stories here. Yeah, because Vietnam really did a number. And Vietnam, once again, is linked to what I feel, there he is. There's the duo. Right, Charlton Comics, the cheapest comic company who made cheap paper, but they controlled all the distribution. Then Derby, Connecticut. I of course, when these comics came out, I wasn't even born yet. But the reprints in the early 80s I saw, and a mystery for me personally was solved. I had this comic. This was like no other war comic I had read, because like you said, the main character, right, was from the viewpoint of a German officer, a heroic German officer, a German officer who actually is a good fighter and kills a bunch of Americans by himself. Everyone in this story dies, by the way. It's very tragic, the ending, when he was going to surrender, but he got shot by the fanatical Nazi who he shot in return. But the Americans, they light him up anyway with the flamethrower. And I remember the last panel was his French lover, now, alone. Probably better before she was going to get her head shaved, right? But this story was interesting. Very interesting. He wrote this. I didn't know that all these years later. Of course, I've gone over Willie Schultz. I've learned more about the Iron Corporal. Obviously, Willie's great, but the Iron Corporal stories are really amazing, too. Obviously, the issue I went over recently, this was the last one. And unfortunately, man, this Iron Corporal looks cool. Look at this. Really gritty stories, anti-war stories. How did they get through to Charlton? I remember Shotgun Harker and Chicken, the Vietnam comic that was going on while Vietnam was going on. I want to go over that at some point, but I think it's Glansman's art. Look at this female Japanese sniper. There's I've only seen about 6 of these Iron Corporal stories. There's like another 11 of them, but This, unfortunately, has not turned out. And look, you can see Van Zandt did work. He did artwork for it, or at least he did this. But this Kickstarter never went anywhere. So a close friend of mine actually gave money to this because he knew I liked this. And nada. I'm not a fan of the Kickstarters and the Indiegogos, by the way. You see how that's been abused by some of the former Comicsgate guys, but I don't want to get into that. Right, Combat, Dell Comics, right? This is where Glansman did these stories that were basically just retellings of what happened. And of course, I've gone over this. Right? The Hornet Tank gets short shrift in this book, but I love the Hornet Tank. Sorry. The Jigsaw Tank, they should have kept this. This thing, if they would have kept this tank, okay, it would have at least made sense how they were knocking out like heavy German tanks all the time. But Glansman, I can't say enough about him. And I've gone over the USS Stevens. These were probably the best, most realistic World War II stories that you had in comics ever. Because just like other guys, Glansman was there. He was on the PT boat. The, what was it? 49, or what was it? Right, 479. He was on this thing. And he was in battles. He saw the Baka, the suicide rocket planes. And I remember Toro. But I went over this. The Nam. Dude, the Nam, man. I didn't realize how long this ran. Marvel, like, this was amazing. I didn't realize, too, that another writer got involved with this, and a future artist, and Chuck Dixon was in this, too. More on him later. I'm not going to go over this. Not a fan of Jack Kirby. Non-superhero stuff. I mean, look at this. Come on, man. Try to draw a fucking tank, dude, but with your messed up fingers. But he's great for superhero stuff, but I don't know why they give so much attention to him when he took over the Losers, who I like the Losers. He took all these different characters and put them in a group because all their groups all got wiped out and they were the only survivors, and so they became like a ragtag group, the Losers. But John Severin, to me, the Losers is John Severin, okay? A much better artist than Kirby. Sorry. My bias. Nah. Now, just rounding this out, of course, I've done more than one video on this. Don Lomax, another war vet of this conflict. This is probably, right, the best war comic that has, probably the most continuing comic that was ever made, okay? It was, the guy totally did everything. The artwork, the detail, the horrific, the comedic. Honestly, Vietnam Journal, I would say, is the best war comic, and particularly this guy is still making the comics and producing. My friend Nero got me this. I read through this once. This is going to be pretty depressing, and I'm going to cover that one. Of course, you had the Nam, and you had this artist, this guy, become an artist on the Nam in the middle to later issues after Mike Gold left, Wayne Van Zandt. And I didn't know Lomax worked on it. Of course, it's Van Zandt. I've gone over how many things. And a real quick thing, this comic here, right? The War in Korea. This is an excellent, excellent one about the Korean War, right? It's hard to find. Yes, it is. And I had this, but what happened to it? I had it in a container in my grandfather's attic. And I guess I didn't close the lid, and there was a rainstorm, and this was on top, and this was destroyed, and now it's going for like hundreds of bucks. But and Katusha, I've not, more on this at some other date, but this is the biggest thing he's ever done. So who's left? Oh, Garth Ennis. I know I always rip on you, huh? But still, I have a lot of issues with him. I've gone over. Very moralist. The evil men need to be brutally tortured and unmanned and humiliated in every story. Okay, but one thing that he can't avoid is that when you follow the war, like most British guys realize, the Germans were pretty in the war. Second war, the Germans were the best soldiers, man. They whooped the shit out of like groups. Everyone knows this. Okay? Oh, you're a wearable. The hell is that? I'm gonna do I'll do a little addendum because I want to finish this properly and give, believe it or not, Garth Ennis, who actually looks like one of my bosses from back in the '90s in retail. I want to give him some respect. Yes, I respect the enemy. He's not the enemy. Come on, mate.